I don't know where to begin this week or tonight's podcast. I really don't. There is so much chaos, isn't there? Just so much chaos. Do you feel like things are spinning out of control? What little control that we had the illusion was being maintained? The fifth column of fascists in this country is in full takeover mode. It's going to happen in the midterm elections. And as a matter of fact, let me share something with you right now that I found at today's Washington Post. This is a piece written by Matt Bai. I've quoted his stuff a lot of times. I think he writes for Rolling Stone also. But Matt says, if you're a Democrat looking for reasons to be hopeful about your electoral prospects, then I've got one of those classic good news, bad news scenarios for you. Now, that's his opening sentence. The headline over his opinion piece is, why losing the midterms isn't the worst thing for Democrats. When I saw that headline, I thought, really? I disagree, but okay. So Matt says, the bad news, good news, bad news. The bad news for Democrats is that your party, the Democratic Party, is heading for a world of hurt in November. Because every single political poll being taken right now, as we've talked before on this podcast, can't be wrong. But the good news, in a manner of speaking, I guess, I'm certainly not going to edit Matt, but he says the good news is that getting blown out in 2022 may be the only path Democrats have to holding the White House in 2024. Now, obviously, and Matt makes this point too, that the cost of a Republican takeover, fascist, see, Matt still calls them Republicans, and as do most writers. I haven't found a writer yet, opinion writer, who refers to these son of a bitches as fascist Christians, which is what they are. But I'll use his terminology, and he insists that the costs of Republican takeover in November are going to be steep in the short run. No kidding. And he points out the obvious, that these aren't the conservative revolutionaries of 1994 when Clinton had his ass handed to him. They're not the Tea Party crazy bastards in 2010 that went after Barack Obama. This Republican voter, this group of Republicans, fascist Christians, is the mutant gene version of a Republican uprising. And as Matt points out, it is a full-on, crazy, dystopian movement of conspiracists and authoritarians. Matt, you left out the word fascists, but that's okay. So, as Matt writes, brace yourself for no end of mindless investigations. Oh, you know what they're going to do, don't you? Matt doesn't mention this, but one of the first things they're going to do is to write up articles of impeachment against Biden. They're going to launch assaults on the electoral system. They're going to be putting out there nationalistic or American fascist proposals for governance. And quoting this sick fuck over here in Georgia, the Q bitch, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who referred to a peach tree dish last week when she's trying to say petri dish, but you have to understand Marjorie Taylor Greene would be challenged by a goddamn mushroom in a contest as to who had the most intellectual power. There are so many dumbasses. You have to be a dumbass to begin with to be a fascist Christian. But Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kristi Noem and Boebert and some of these crazy white men, they really personify insanity, ignorant insanity. But as Matt points out, there's going to be a virtual peach tree dish for paranoia as a means of governing this country once these fascist bastards take over. But he also is willing to, that was the bad news. He says everything we know about modern politics suggests that the best way, maybe the only way, for a Democrat to get reelected, that would be Biden, is also to be the last guy standing between the broad American electorate, that's the majority of us, and these Nazi fuckers in the Fascist Christian Party. Biden, believe it or not, is going to turn out to be the sheriff who's standing there protecting the town from the outlaws and bandits who just rode into town and been waiting. And all of us residents of the town are hiding in our houses because we know the bandits are furious, sick, fascist son of a bitches, and the sheriff is standing out there. Joe Biden, there he is. Now, this is not unique. There's a pattern here. And I mentioned a second ago, back in 1992, after he barely won the presidency in defeating Herbert Walker Bush, Clinton immediately tried to rewrite the social contract. Remember, the first thing that Hillary Clinton did was, to, along with help from Ira Magaziner and a couple other people, is to come up from a national health care plan. Boy, did the Nazis go after that. But Clinton tried to rewrite the social contract, and he got himself in an incredible cultural war right at the start. He became the first Democrat in almost 50 years during the midterm elections of his first term, the first Democrat in almost 50 years to lose control of both chambers in those midterms. And I remember that. It was the first time that the Republicans had any power in the legislative branch in my entire life. Seriously. To me, Republicans were always the minority party. So what did Clinton do? He moderated his message. He stared down the new Republican majority over its shutdown of the federal government. Remember that? Newt Gingrich and the rest of those fuckers? Oh, and Joe Scarborough was involved in that too. So Clinton was reelected easily because he was the sheriff standing between these marauding hordes of Nazis who were just having been born, the American Nazi Party. It was still called the Republican Party. It wasn't totally fascist Christian yet. So anyway, 12 years later, Barack Obama swept into office on another Democratic wave. I remember thinking, my God, we finally have arrived. boy, was that a mistake. And he went on his own, Barack Obama did, government expansion bender, and he suffered his own midterm rebuke. What did he lose? 45 or 47 seats in the U.S. House? It was a bloodbath. So Obama then was cast as the lone bulwark, well, the sheriff, against Republican insanity. There stood Barack Obama in the middle of the street in the town with his pistols on his hips, and the only thing preventing the marauders from taking over was this time Barack Obama. And he was returned to office by a comfortable margin. Okay? Now we're to Joe Biden. Biden has spent most of the past 2 years trying to satisfy the rising left flank of the Democratic Party. And it's been mostly a vain effort to try to enact some kind of a sweeping agenda, whether it's called the Build Back Better idea, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Everything Biden has tried to do has been smashed to the ground by these filthy goddamn fascist Christians. And some of what he has tried to do has been, and I understand this is not criticism, but it's been the impatience of the left flank of the Democratic Party, which for all intents and purposes, a lot of people thought was dead and buried and gone, the left flank. So the party in charge, if you want to call it that, the Democratic Party, has spent incredible amounts of time talking about police reform and college loan forgiveness. But those aren't the issues that the rest of the country has been focused on. Rising crime, slaughter in the streets, inflation. So, as Matt points out, nobody at the White House is going to say this out loud, but the fact is that losing control of the House, which is going to happen, and possibly the Senate, which is going to happen this November, would instantly make the presidency a more manageable job. Because here's what it would do. And again, I hate to say this, but this is realpolitik. With the fascist Christians in control of the legislative branch, it's going to curb the power of the Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders wing of the party. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. And that'll free Biden to pursue the kind of mainstream liberal agenda. And his infrastructure law was a good example that the voters thought they were getting in the first place. So Biden will be free to start pushing that. Now, with no legislative branch behind him, Biden doesn't appropriate money. That's up to the Congress. But once the people see that Biden has drifted back to the center, I hate to say this, but he's drifted back to the center, then the people are going to insist, according to Matt Byen, I don't disagree with Matt, that these filthy fascist Christians start acting like elected representatives of the people. Now, I have to add my 2 cents worth here, Matt, as if Matt were listening. It doesn't make any difference what the American people are going to demand. Once the fascist Christians get control of the legislative branch, they're going to ignore totally what the majority of people in this country want. Totally. So the way Matt puts it is this newly emboldened Republican majority that'll be in place come January 2023 will gravitate even more strongly towards these anti-democratic, these fascist themes of election fraud and intolerance. So like Clinton and Obama before him, Joe Biden will have the chance to rebrand himself as the grown-up, standing firm against, well, Matt calls them bullies and extremists. I call them Nazis and anti-democratic fascist Christians. Now, whether or not Biden's standing in the middle of Main Street with both guns in the holsters, waiting for the bad guys to show up, whether or not that's going to intimidate the Christians, I tend to doubt. But I'll go along with Matt Byen's idea here for a while. So this means that Biden, instead of spending every free minute trying to hold the factions of his own party together, that means that Joe Biden can give speeches in defense of principles, statesman-like speeches, principles that resonate with the broad electorate, with most of us. And then Matt adds this, in the 2 years after his party lost control of Congress, Clinton issued no fewer than 17 vetoes. All of Clinton's vetoes were in the name of protecting the voters from these crazy son of a bitches in the Republican Party back in the mid-90s. Those crazy son of a bitches now probably would be considered sane compared to what we have now, but I digress. So, getting here to the point, Joe Biden, as president, would then be free to run against Washington itself, Washington being the legislative branch, which is the only way anyone has won the presidency since Watergate, by the way, is running against the establishment, the legislative branch. And as Matt points out, short of campaigning against Putin himself, Biden will not find a less popular adversary than the United States Congress. And it's going to get so much worse after these midterms. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.